You are listening to Accents, a radio show for literature, art, and culture. I'm your host, Katerina Stoikova, and my guest is poet, translator, teacher, Jeremy Paden. Hi, Jeremy, how are you?
Hello, Katerina. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, very happy to see you and to talk to you. It has been a while, and I hope it's not that much long until I see you in person around town.
Yeah, when you had your 10th anniversary for Accents, I really regretted not being able to make it to the library for that event. And I mean, I regretted it at that time, but had I known that it would mean then having to lock oneself in the house, I would have probably doubled my efforts to try to make it.
Yes, worlds without literary events, about face to face without the hugs, by other poets. That is taxing. I miss that.
Yeah, I have a friend who talks. She's a fiction writer, and she talks about novelists as being very solitary, but that her experience with poets is that we tend to be more gregarious, and we like a community of poets.
I think we're gregarious for about 5 minutes and then we're exhausted.
Yeah, I,
I
I
don't know.
think you might be
Speaking
right.
speaking about a friend, I don't know.
Yeah.
So you have some good news. Tell us about the picture book first, maybe.
Yes. Well, I've got the official release date for this book, which is July 14th. We had been planning on then having a release date and a, a gallery exhibition of the illustrations to go up at the Carnegie Center on July 17th, but unfortunately, given the pandemic, the Carnegie Center is closed. But yes, this has been a project that I, over the last 2 years or so, have been working with the Lexington publishing house, Shadeland House Modern Press. It's put together by, or it's run by Virginia and Stephanie Underwood. And so they and I, and then a former student from Transylvania, she graduated a couple of years ago, by the name of Anelisa Hermosilla. She's Panamanian. She and I have been working on this picture book that is about the migrant caravan, and so she's done a set of lovely
Oh, yes.
lovely illustrations for this. And yeah, we started this project probably about 2 years ago, and it's a wonderful thing to see it realized.
Congratulations.
Well,
Tell
thank
us,
you.
tell us again the name of the picture book.
Oh yeah, the name of the picture book is Under the Ocelot Sun, and it's bilingual. It's Bajo el Sol del Ocelote, and the translation was done in collaboration with a friend of mine who is a Spanish, well, he's a Latin American literature professor at UNC Chapel Hill. His name is Osvaldo Estrada, and so yes, so the book itself is in English and Spanish, and it tells the story of, or it's a mother telling her daughter stories about her own childhood as a means of explaining to her why they took part in the migrant caravan and why they're waiting at they're waiting at the American border to cross into the United States.
And you write in both English and Spanish.
Correct.
And last year, your writing won an award. Tell us about it.
Well, actually, it was this year. There's a publishing house, a poetry publishing house out of Granada, Spain. It's called Valparaíso Ediciones, and last fall they opened up their first Poet in New York prize. The name, or in Spanish it's Poeta en Nueva York. The name refers to the collection of poems by Federico Garcia Lorca, who was himself from Andalusia. He was from Granada, and wrote his now famous and well-regarded collection of poems while living in New York in the I should know this. I want to say it's in the late 1920s. I want to say it's about 27, 28 when he was there. And so they opened up a competition for poets that live in the US but write in Spanish. And I was fortunate enough to be named a co-winner. So they gave it to two poets, Yvonne Gordon being one of them. She's a poet from Ecuador and lives in California, I believe. And then I was named a co-winner for a collection called Autorretrato como una iguana, or autobiography as an iguana, which has been an animal that has fascinated me all of my life.
Oh, wonderful.
And I mean, you write in two languages. How do you in Bulgarian and English? How do you find that experience of writing in two different languages?
Not odd at all. It sometimes puts me in predicament when I write something in English that only the Bulgarian audience can understand, and or connect to, or even be interested in, but I cannot translate it back into the other language. So in this case, I just know that this particular audience, if it ever sees the light of day, would be seen, would be read or understood or appreciated by very narrow audience, only those who speak both languages and understand both cultures in a way. So, but I find that I write in two languages, and sometimes it's a mixture, and sometimes I weave, and sometimes I rhyme one language with a word with another, which is, you'll never be able to fix that, or at least not very easily. What about you? What's your process?
Well, when I first started writing, this is back a little bit before college even, and then especially in college, I wrote in both, and oftentimes I wrote in English, and then I also wrote in Spanish, and then oftentimes I combined the two, and especially early on, a lot of that play was sonic. There was a lot. It was using the rhythms and the rhymes of the two languages to make something that was completely bilingual and not and only legible to those who operate in both languages.
Right.
And then in graduate school, because I went to, my undergraduate degree was in English, my graduate degree was in Spanish. And for some reason or another, during graduate school, I almost exclusively wrote my poetry in English. My term papers and my essays and those, the critical writing was done in Spanish, but as a way of sort of, I guess, protecting protecting a little space from the academic, I was writing only in English. But then, when I moved on, most of what I read is in Spanish. Most of the poetry that I read is in Spanish. And so even while I was continuing to write in English, there's ways in which the syntax and the reference that I was making, the literary allusions, oftentimes tend to be to either Spanish or Latin American literature, and that can be hard or impossible for an audience to follow.
So my question is about the book that you wrote in English. Will it be published now, and will it be published in Granada in Spanish, and then you're gonna bring it here? What's next steps on that?
Well, the next steps on that, it'll be published bilingually.
Oh,
so,
excellent.
So
wonderful when that works, right? Because it doesn't always.
No, it doesn't always work. And in fact, there was a poem or two that as I was writing them, I thought at one moment, I thought, there's just no way to be able to translate this poem into English. I think I've found a way, but yes, I've when I heard that that I was a co-winner and that it was going to be published, I began working on translating those into English, and in part because I wanted to ensure, from the very beginning, the project or the call was for these books to be published, or the winner to be published in English and Spanish in a bilingual edition. But I wanted to ensure that I was happy with the English, and so I wanted to ensure that I was the one translating them. Now, because you've done that as well, have you not? Is that the air around the butterfly? Was that not something that you translated from Bulgarian, or?
More likely from English to Bulgarian.
English to Bulgarian.
And it became a bilingual edition, but I've also had a book that was published in Bulgarian, and then I translated it in English, and it was published in English in the United States. And that was a real party, because it did not work one-to-one. But it was challenging, it was interesting, and gave me an opportunity for another cut through the material.
And so how do you, that's the question that I've been wondering about myself, is because there's a way in which translation, and especially with translation of one's own work, I feel a certain temptation to be very free.
As you should.
With that, and less respectful of the original version. Did you feel the same with your own work, that this was a way of rewriting?
Oh yeah, it's editing. To me, it's a form of editing. You can totally, if you translate a poem from one language to another, then back to the same language, that is a really interesting way of editing and close look into the meaning. And yes, I'm a whole lot more forgiving and liberal and heavy-handed in the edits of my own poems. I wouldn't dare do such thing to, if I was translating anybody else, basically, dead or alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm my own author of my own translations, and my own translations are no less original than the language that I wrote them in first. It's a really interesting experience, like no other, basically. I'm translating a book right now by an American author into Bulgarian childhood, Emily Grossholz. You know, she's a Penn State professor and an award-winning poet, and it is a lot. I mean, I feel a lot less free
Yeah.
to edit, uh, but it's also humbling because it teaches you how to write like somebody else and to really connect to the intention of somebody else. Shape shifting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want for you to tell us about the full-length poetry book that is coming next year in New Mexico, right?
Yes. Through a press called a Taos press, so it's out of Taos, New Mexico, and that full-length collection is called World as Sacred Burning Heart, and it's a collection of poems that I've been working on for 10 or 12 years. In fact, one of the first poems that that I ever published, because I didn't in graduate school I didn't send out poems for publishing. I would write them for myself and squirrel them away, and then in the first couple of years of being a professor, a college professor, I didn't do that either, because tenure was more based on critical essays than on creative writing. But probably about 12 years ago or so, I did start to send poems away, and so one of the first poems that I sent out was a poem on a quipu, and a quipu is a mnemonic device kept by the Quechua people. It was used in the Inca Empire as a way of record keeping, and anyway, so all of that to say, these are a collection of poems that I've been working on for well over 12 years, and they're on colonial Latin America, and they're written in English. By and large, I mean, some of them are bilingual poems. Some of them are written in English but use Spanish syntax in their as their the sort of the structure that they play with. Some of them are in the voice of various conquistadors, and they employ dramatic irony to sort of undermine the authority of the conquistadors. Other poems in that collection are ekphrastic poems on 16th century maps, or that is, descriptions of these maps and other works of art. And some of the poems are retelling of cosmological or ideological myths from the Nahua people, from the Guarani people, from the Incas, as a way of meditating on the experience of colonialism. And while it is about things that took place 500 years ago, at least in my mind, it seems very timely. It seems very much a meditation on contemporary American politics, and in that, when I say American, I mean both United States politics, but then also the entire hemisphere.
Sounds absolutely fascinating. Human, anthropological, political, historical. I'm sure you did a lot of research with that. And yeah, if you told me, oh, it took me 6 months to put that together, I probably would be very, very surprised. So how did you put a title to all this?
Yeah, so the title actually is connected to those, the ekphrastic poems on maps. In the mid 16th century, once Europe has an idea of what the globe looks like, and once they move to try to represent the globe mathematically, in terms of the way that the continents get laid out, at least as it relates to latitude, because longitude isn't something really that gets defined with precision until the 18th century. But with latitude, as it relates to the equator and to the poles, they're able to figure this out, and have already figured this out by using the pole star and the sextant and other forms of celestial navigation. But there's you get a mathematical problem in terms of how do we represent these continents on the globe, and one of the solutions is the solution that we talk about at the moment, which is the Mercator projection, and that projection is one that shows the northern hemisphere to be substantively larger than the southern hemisphere, so that when you look at a flat map of the world, it looks like Canada and Alaska and Greenland are that much larger than South America or Africa.
Interesting.
And that has to do with a stretching of space. Well, this is happening at the same time that Europeans are still using maps as, maps are ideological documents, but they're still using maps to represent things symbolically. So you get in the 16th century also maps that will show one country shaped like an animal. Well, there was a tradition of a set of maps that are called the cordiform map, or maps shaped like hearts. And so you get a series of maps that show the globe, but show the globe and the two hemispheres, the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere, shaped like a heart.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I love the symbology of it. I can't wait to read the book, and best of luck with it. What have you prepared for us to read today, Jeremy?
Well, let me start with, let me pull it up. Let me start with some poems from Autorretrato como una iguana, and I will read these as I guess I'll read the English version of them rather than the Spanish version. And so this is one called The Angel of Abandoned Houses. The angel of abandoned houses no longer finds the kinds of facilities it used to. Apartments right downtown. When it thinks it's found a room with a bath and kitchen with a disconnected stove. When it thinks it's finally found a place where it can invite speck and particle to rest so they can serve as coverlet to shelves and countertops. It enters and finds a home under construction. A mortgaged condo in the midst of getting fixed up for short-term rentals to transient tourists. The angel of abandoned houses no longer seeks shelter in city centers. It goes out into the country, to the old homesteads. It knows that houses must be lived in, that walls will crumble without children to stain them with their hands. The angel of abandoned houses goes hunting in the far-off corners. It takes shelter in what's been forgotten, and it invites the fox, the owl, the lynx. It offers hospitality to the bat and to every class of animal that needs a lair or a nest. But no longer does it seek out room in city centers where everything must bear interest, where the useless, the fruitless, finds itself foreclosed upon, exiled to the outskirts to live in the wastelands. So that's one of the poems from the Autorretrato, and here's another one called Song of the High Paramo. And the High Paramo, or is the high mountain grasslands, especially of the Andean area. And in certain parts of these, especially as you dip down the eastern side of the Andes towards the Amazon River basin, you get into the cloud forests, and so the geography and the climate is just sort of always drenched in clouds. Song of the High Paramo. When we got to this cloud-wrapped land that never obeyed God's word, that commanded the waters below to separate from those above, wild lands where you can't tell flooded earth from sodden sky, I asked you if the yellow crowns of the frailejón were a comb carding water from the heavens, or if they were sutures that threaded cloud to earth. You hugged me and said, it doesn't matter. Hold me like the espeletia holds cloud and earth together. Soak your roots and your crown in me until you're drenched. The frailejón and the espeletia are two names for the same kind of plant that's similar to, in some ways it's similar to a sunflower, though it's maybe a little more spiky. It looks a little bit more like a thistle. And of course, it's a series. Well, at a certain point, it gets to a series of self-portraits, and I thought I would read some of those once I get to them. Though before we go there, I'll read this poem on beauty. On beauty. Let us agree on beauty, and if not beauty, as some might come to blows over Mozart or Satie, then joy. I remember a night in Salamanca, Philip Glass at the piano in a palace in ruins. We all wanted him to play through the night. An uncle, an a cappella choir director, would have thought this unwholesome. He wept the night he saw The Graduate. Such fury and noise, such empty words. His son left Bach for Cage, the plains of Lubbock for New York skyscrapers. The house just shuddered. My son has woken up and leapt from his bed. He now hops from step to step and hums. There's music in his descent. There's music if you accept chants, if you include ambient noise and allow for improvisation. There's music if you imagine the 12 steps as a new scale. Let's call it the playful mode. Let's call it pure joy. So some of the poems are, like I said, self-portraits, but they're, I mean, and some of them are earnest self-portraits, and some of them are playful self-portraits. But the title poem is, well, there are actually 3 self-portraits as an iguana. I'll read at least the first of these. Self-portrait as an iguana. I want to spend my mornings in the sun. I want to climb to the tops of trees when the first rays of sun light up the world and stay there hour after hour until that fire chases the aches and pains from my body, so I can, once the joints and marrows are warmed through, move about. To have to spend half a day hunting other animals. Ugh. So much energy wasted in camouflage and venom. No, not that life. It's better to stuff myself on flowers and spend my days under the sun in a bougainvillea. And another of these self-portraits, well, I guess I'll read another self-portrait as an iguana. This is self-portrait as an iguana. Well, we'll read the self-portrait as an iguana 3. If I get to it. So self-portrait as an iguana 3. Serpent, serpent with legs. I spend my days dazed under the sun. I am a chicken, a stick chicken. I am iguana, iguana. I am American sister to the chameleon. We are a powerless people. Serpent am I, poisonless serpent, a lizard trapped by hand. I live in the king's palaces. Iguana, iguana insularis, cousin to the iguanas of the Galapagos. We are a powerless people. This is what I am saying. I am a serpent, silly serpent, but counted among the most wise of the earth. And I'll read one more of these self-portraits, because I think this is maybe something that a lot of us have been doing during the pandemic, and that is self-portrait as a husband washing the dishes. Dressed barely, if underwear, t-shirt with sweat and deodorant stains in the pits, and socks with holes where his big toes poke out, counts as being dressed. It's 5 a.m, and he stands by the sink, up to his elbows in soap and water, washing the dishes from last night's party. Politics plays no role. It's not a peace offering, not a gesture of thanks for a night of lovemaking. 3 months ago, the dishwasher broke, and he hasn't yet made time to call the repairman. So those are some of the poems from Autorretrato como una iguana. And I will switch over to to World of Sacred Burning Heart. This isn't the first poem in the collection, but it is the first of the captain poems. And the captain poems are the poems that are in the voice of the conquistadors. Though, should we stop? Do you have any questions on that first collection, or?
No, I don't have any questions. I just have the comment that is super interesting. The series of self-portraits I find really moving, and I wrote down for myself, see if you can write a self-portrait as something, because I want to. Your work inspires me. And we have about 5 more minutes, and whatever
Okay.
else you want to share with us would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Yes, so I will read one or two from the collection, World is Sacred Burning Heart. This is the first of the captain poems. Like I was saying earlier, the captain poems are mostly in the voice of various conquistadors. This one, though, is not. This one tries to set up the collection as being about more than just things that happened 500 years ago. It's called The Captain Dreams America. Every time naked she lies, hammock strung between mahogany and ceiba. Every time the dream gets good, come the demons, peccaries first, ravenous and loud, bellow and clack through the underbrush, then cannibals with their barbecue pits and roasted leg of priest half nod. And when the mountain's green, and when the grain stalk flowers, and the promised seed is set to plump and golden for the harvest, and the bread, comes the blight, and the land coughs up dust, and the rivers, mighty wide in the middle of their course, dry before they reach the sea. And should the captain open veranda doors for air and light, storm clouds and hard winds, empty of rain, sweep the high plains. And when the captain rides the fence to check the crops, they've fallen, and the corn by bison and antelope lies trampled. In some he dreams he too falls under hoof. In some he hunts the herds till skulls tumble like weeds across the plains. The captain dreams America as city of opal and alabaster, of steel. He swears America is land open and free for the running and the grabbing, for the fending off and the fending for. He dreams America virginal, but finds himself always waking up in beds from back behind the house. I had spoken earlier of that first poem, the Kipu poem, and I guess I'll read this one and then maybe one more. And this is on a kipu, and again, a kipu is a string with a lot of other strings and knots coming off of them. On a kipu, small wolka of hand-turned cotton and llama wool, black, beige, burnt sienna, and gray, like the kulwa of Wari or Cusco, thread spun into supple memory. From the central sinuous cord radiate finer plates, inti rays that emanate from behind a partial eclipse, each strand sung and sung again into knots. Not a poetry of cold, hard things, but story, story braided and tied into knots. A census taken before and then also after war. An inventory of the papa yield at the birth and death of Manco Capac's son. The ages and names of the virgins taken and left in the snows. The laments chanted after floods, after droughts. The dates when the kila turns blood red. Kipu, cotton-spun history. Woolly knowledge nodded. Plaited prayers of the Kipu Kamayok. kipu, unheard prophecy, unsung. And some of that last bit refers to the fact that it's just been difficult to know how to read them and how to uncode these kipus. And let me finish with this one. One of the captains is of course is Columbus, and one of the things that Columbus spent the last couple of years of his life doing was collecting up verses from the Bible and collecting up sayings from theologians to try to prove that he had been chosen by God to sail to America. And this was all part of an attempt on his part to convince the crown that they needed to respect the original terms of their agreement, because when it turned out that what Columbus stumbled upon was an entire continent filled with people and filled with new wonders, the crown quickly tried to move to limit his what he felt to be his rights. And so this is called "The Captain Will Write a Book of Prophecies." Certain all present is future perfect. The captain will have sat down to read of his exploits in Isaiah and the Psalms. Before even this, he will have spoken with Moors and Jews about the world's perplexities, and only after sail to find the islands that swallow the sun. Certain that to read without writing is to sleep, he'll have copied down all God's promises scattered in Scripture, the saints, in the book of the world. He'll have compiled his commonplace, but only after having been returned to cinder shackled, and that only after he foretells the moon's dressing up in blood skirts to wow the residents of Jamaica, and this only once the shipworms have eaten the hull of his boats and forced him aground on an island still free. I was chosen because I was bold enough to chase the sun, Columbus will write. These are the latter days of awe and wonderment, days when I will have returned from the vast expanse of the ocean sea with news of an archipelago where cannibals sing and dance out in the dust the story of how their canoes brought them to this high motherland of silk cotton trees. Certain then that God has touched him, that he has traveled through time and come back. The captain will see nothing but calm December days. Had not the Siboney told him just to the south an island sits heavy with gold, and hasn't his heart always been pure?
Wow, Jeremy, thank you so much for reading and sharing and for answering my question and spending time with me and the listeners of Accents. Really appreciate you and hope to see you again soon on Accents and where you can show the new books.
Well, thank you. And we, the poetry community and the entire writing community, certainly of Lexington and certainly of the state of Kentucky, appreciate all the work you do. And I'm sure that it extends well beyond the Commonwealth. And yes, I very much look forward to that time when we can all get together and in person see each other and spend time reading and talking and laughing together.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.